down to the garage, stepped into the elevator, hit the button without looking, and only when the doors opened did I realize I'd come out on the executive floor instead of the parking level. I almost stepped back in. Then I heard a laugh from down the hall. A woman's laugh. Low, easy. I knew that laugh. I'd heard it across our kitchen for 9 years. Couldn't be. I walked toward it slowly. Through the gap in the door, I could see Voigt, our CEO, sitting on the corner couch. And next to him, close, half-turned toward him, was Claire, my wife, who'd told me she'd be at a client dinner in Back Bay all evening. I pushed the door open. They both looked up. There was a half-second pause, long enough to notice, short enough to brush off, and then Voigt smiled like nothing was happening. Dan, good, glad you stopped by. We were just going over PR strategy for the new vertical. I'm looking at expanding our contract with your wife's agency. I nodded, told him I didn't want to interrupt. Then I looked at Claire and asked, casually, if she was heading home or still going to her thing in Back Bay. The dinner, she said. I'm heading there now. I told her I'd see her at home and walked out. Maybe there was a perfectly normal explanation. A client meeting that ran over, a quick handoff before her dinner. Any other Friday, I would have believed it without thinking. But for the first time in 9 years, I found myself wondering whether I actually knew where my wife was going tonight. I walked out of the building and got into my Lexus. Her white Audi was parked 3 rows over, near the side exit. I could see it from where I was sitting. I wasn't planning to follow anyone. I just wanted to see her get into her car and drive south, toward Back Bay, the way she said she would. Then I'd go home and feel stupid about the whole thing. So I sat, engine off, phone face down on the passenger seat. 20 minutes went by, then the side door opened and the two of them came out together. Voigt was talking, Claire was nodding, walking close to him. They didn't look like two people who'd just wrapped a meeting. They looked like two people in the middle of something. She walked right past her own car, didn't even glance at it, kept walking with him to the far end of the lot, to his black Mercedes. He opened the passenger door for her. She got in. The Mercedes pulled out and turned left at the exit. North. Back Bay was the other direction. I sat there with my hands on the wheel and watched the taillights until they were gone. After a minute, I picked up the phone and called her. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. A text came through about a minute later. On my way to dinner, can't talk. Love you. I read it twice. Then I started the truck and drove home. The whole way back, I kept telling myself there was still some version of this where I was wrong. I just couldn't think of what it was. Around 1 in the morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Claire. Dinner ran late. Everyone's been drinking. I'm staying at Sarah's. Don't want to drive or wake you up. I'll swing by in the morning to change. I read it in the dark and put the phone down. She came home a little after 8. Changed clothes, made coffee, told me about the dinner. Some client of the agency, a long table, too much wine. Voigt had given her a ride to the restaurant because he was heading that way anyway. She said it casually, like it didn't matter. I nodded, asked which client, and she gave me a name. On the drive to the office, I called a guy I knew at that company. Made it sound like a catch-up. Near the end, I said something like, "Hey, I heard my wife had dinner with your team last night." He paused. "Last night? No, nothing on our side. Nobody from us was out." I thanked him and hung up. So the dinner didn't exist, which meant Sarah didn't exist either. If she wasn't at the restaurant and she wasn't at her friend's place, then where had she actually spent the night? That's when I remembered the Audi app. I pulled into a coffee shop lot. We'd linked her car to my account 2 years ago when we bought it for service alerts. She'd long forgotten. I hadn't touched it once. The trip history loaded. Yesterday's entry was right at the top. Her Audi pulled into the firm's garage at 9:14 in the morning. It didn't move again until 7:40 the next morning. Sarah lives in Brookline. If Claire had gone there, the car would have gone with her. The car stayed in the firm's garage all night. I closed the app and sat with my hands on the wheel. I still didn't know who she'd spent the night with, but I knew she hadn't spent it where she said she had. I didn't confront her. Not then, not the next morning, not at any point that week. I went to work, said hello to Voigt in the hallway, ate dinner with Claire, asked about her day. I gave her nothing to react to. There was one thing she'd forgotten about. 2 years ago, when she was traveling a lot for the agency, she'd shared her phone location with me so I could see she'd landed safely. She never turned it off after the trip stopped. I never used it. Until now, I hadn't needed to. About 2 weeks later, she texted me in the afternoon. "Cocktail thing at a client's tonight. Going to run late." Don't wait up on dinner. At 6, I opened the map. The dot with her name was moving. 20 minutes later, it stopped. Not in the financial district where her agency's clients usually held things. A quiet block on Beacon Hill. One specific address. I took my keys and drove over. Not to go inside, just to see. I parked a block away and walked. Her Audi was at the curb. 2 houses down, Voight's Mercedes. I crossed the street and stood under a tree where I could see the front door and the driveway. And I waited. 2 hours in, the door opened. In the light of the entryway, Voight and Claire stood together. He had his hands on her shoulders, saying something low. She put her hand flat on his chest. They stayed like that for a few seconds. Then he walked her to her car, one hand on the small of her back the whole way. A short hug by the door. She got in. He waited until she pulled away, then went back inside. I walked back to my car. Up until that night, every piece of it could be explained away. Standing there on Beacon Hill, that stopped being true. Saturday morning, I went out for a run. Claire was still in bed when I left. The house was quiet. I got back about 40 minutes later, came in through the side door, and started up the stairs to grab a shower. Halfway up, I heard her voice from the guest room. The door was almost closed. She was on the phone, and her voice was sharp, not the voice she used with friends or family. I stopped on the stairs. I caught his name first. Richard. Then a few seconds of something I couldn't make out. Then, clear through the door. Richard, you made him a senior manager. I want you to make him a partner. You promised me last year. I stood there on the step. I turned around and went back down, slow and quiet, the way you move in a house where someone can't know you're there. I went out to the driveway, got in my car, and drove to the office. Nobody around on a Saturday. I rode the elevator up and sat in my own office with the door closed. For years ago, Claire introduced me to Voight at a holiday party. A month later, he called me himself and offered me a junior spot at the firm. 3 promotions in 3 years. Senior manager at 38. I told myself I'd earned every step. I believed it. Maybe it hadn't started with the first promotion. Maybe not even with the second. But sitting there with the door closed, I couldn't ignore what I'd just heard. Claire wasn't asking Richard for a partnership because she believed in my career. She was bargaining. Then it hit me from the other side. If he made me partner, I'd have access to everything. The books, the clients, the contracts. He'd be handing me the keys. 3 weeks later, Voight called me into his office, closed the door, poured 2 glasses of something from the cabinet, and told me the partners had voted. I was in. Partner. He shook my hand and said he'd always believed in me. I thanked him, said the right things, walked out with the glass still in my hand. That same evening, I stayed late after everyone left. New partners got access to the financial system. Every contract, every invoice, every wire the firm had sent or received. I opened it and went looking for one vendor. Claire's agency had been on the books for 4 years. The first contract was signed around the same time I got hired. Voight's signature on every renewal. Even to me, the numbers looked high. Year after year, they went up. I printed everything. Contracts, invoices, payment records. It came out to a thick folder. The next morning, I called a private investigator a guy at the firm had used once for a custody case. I gave him the Beacon Hill address and Voight's general schedule and asked for 2 weeks of work. Photographs with dates and times. Nothing more. 2 weeks later, he handed me an envelope. Dozens of shots. Voight and Claire walking into the house, leaving the house, dinner at a restaurant in the North End, an arm around her waist in a parking garage. Every photo time-stamped and labeled. I put the photos into the folder with the contracts. The whole thing fit in my briefcase. I checked the calendar. The next partners meeting was Thursday morning. Full room. All 10 of them. That night, Claire asked how my week was going. I told her it was a big one. She smiled and said she was proud of me. Thursday morning, I came in early. Suit, clean shirt, the briefcase under my arm. I sat through the first part of the meeting like any other Thursday. Voight at the head of the table. Coffee, status updates, a discussion about a new pitch. When the agenda moved to other business, I asked for the floor. I opened the briefcase and set the folder on the table in front of me. Then I spoke. Slowly, the way you talk when you don't need to raise your voice. I told the room that 4 years ago the firm had brought on a PR agency owned by my wife. That every contract since had been signed personally by Richard. That the fees had climbed every year. And that none of the partners in this room had been told that Richard and the owner of that agency were in an undisclosed personal relationship while those contracts were being renewed. I pushed the folder to the partner on my right. The contracts went one way around the table. The photographs went the other. Nobody spoke for a long moment. I watched the photos pass from hand to hand. The North End restaurant. The Beacon Hill doorway. His arm around her waist. Voight started talking. He said the contracts had been at market rates. That his personal life had no bearing on the business. That he was prepared to walk through every payment, line by line. Nobody answered him. The senior partner at the far end finally set down a photo and looked up. He told Richard that until the firm sorted this out, he was stepping back from running anything. Effective immediately, they'd bring in outside people to go through every contract with the agency. Voight looked at me. I looked back. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the room. I stayed in my chair. The folder was still going around the table. I drove home in the middle of the afternoon. Claire's Audi was in the driveway. The lights were on in the living room. She was standing in the middle of the room when I walked in. Arms crossed, pale, makeup smudged under one eye. Voight had clearly called her the second he left the building. She didn't try to deny anything. She went the other way, straight at me. She told me I had no idea what I'd just done, that she had stayed with Richard only to pull me up, that without her I'd still be sitting in some cubicle pushing paper. Then she said it. You think you're a genius? You think those 3 promotions in 3 years were yours? You'd have been a senior manager until retirement, shuffling paperwork. I fought for every position for you. I begged him for that partnership. I let her finish. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I took one step forward and looked her straight in the eye. You wanted me at that level so badly? Well, you got me there. But at this level, I'm the one playing. This morning, I showed the partners every contract between you. Every payment. Every photo. Richard's been removed from the firm. All your contracts are frozen. Anything else, you'll hear from my lawyer. I turned and walked past her, down the hall to the guest room. Closed the door behind me. I could hear her in the living room. She didn't follow. She didn't call after me. After a few minutes, I heard her keys come off the counter. The front door opened and closed. Her car started in the driveway. Then it backed out and was gone. The house went quiet. 2 weeks after the meeting the review was done, Richard was let go. No package, no goodbye dinner. The firm sent a short notice to clients and to the press, and that was it. By the end of that week, his name had started coming up in places it never used to. In meetings, at industry lunches, in calls with clients. People would mention it, then watch each other's faces, then change the subject. I sat through a few of those without saying anything. The firm cut all contracts with Claire's agency the same day Richard was let go. 2 of her other clients walked within the month. Nobody wanted to be the one still signing checks to her. I heard about her side through her sister, who called me once to ask if there was anything that could still be worked out. There wasn't. Through that call, I learned the agency was down to a handful of small accounts. The lease on her office was up at the end of the quarter, and she wasn't going to renew. The money she'd been bringing home dried up. Her half of the mortgage stopped showing in the joint account. I covered the payments for the next 2 months myself. Not for her, for the house, so nothing would get messy before the lawyers were done. Claire moved out the same week Richard left the firm. She didn't ask to stay and talk. She didn't ask for anything. She packed 2 suitcases and a garment bag and drove off in the Audi. I watched her pull out of the driveway from the kitchen window. Then I went back to making coffee. The divorce went through without a fight. Claire didn't push back on anything. We put the house on the market a month after she moved out. It sold quickly. We split what was left after the mortgage down the middle, signed the last of the paperwork in a lawyer's office downtown, and walked out separate doors. I took my share and moved into a place closer to the office. 2 bedrooms, a view of the river. Nothing fancy. Enough. Claire took her share and rented a small place outside the city. I heard about it through the same sister who'd called before. The agency was down to 2 people, running out of a shared workspace. A couple of months later, word went around the firm about Richard. His wife had filed. She'd found out why he was let go, and that had been the end of it. He'd left Boston and moved out to be near his older son in another state. At the firm, I kept my head down and did the work. Partners who'd watched me hand that folder around the table started bringing me in on the bigger accounts. A year in, I had a book of clients of my own. None of it tied to Richard. None of it tied to Claire. Sometimes at night, in the new apartment, I'd think back to that Friday. The elevator down to the garage. My finger on the button without looking. I was about to go home. I didn't. That's how it ended. The real tragedy here isn't the infidelity. It's the crushing blow to Dan's identity when he realizes his hard-earned success was just a byproduct of his wife's affair. But instead of letting that realization break him, he mastered the very game they used to trap him, stripped away the lies, and finally built a life that truly belonged to him. What if he hadn't missed his floor in the elevator that night? Would he still be living in blissful ignorance, loving his wife, proud of his partnership, and believing he earned every step? What do you think is better, a bitter